Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, your host for the Voice of Leadership and for Dr. Karen Speaks Leadership. And today we are talking about how to create a remarkable life and business. The remarkable life goes beyond world-class service to make a profound difference in people's lives. When you live a remarkable life, you are conspicuously extraordinary. How do you create such a life? Today's special guest knows what it takes and also knows the benefits of living a remarkable life. Dr. Randy Ross is the CEO of Remarkable and a best-selling author of multiple books, including Remarkable, Roadmap to Remarkable, Relationomics, Fireproof Happiness, and his latest book entitled Make Life Good. Working with brands like Delta, Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, GE Appliances, McDonald's, Panasonic, Cox Communications, Keller Williams, Compass Group, Chick-fil-A, and the Intercontinental Hotel Group, he has inspired and enabled countless people to find new passion and purpose in their work, to work better together in teams, and have greater influence and impact. Dr. Ross, a former chief people officer, says, when people like what they do it better. When people like those they do it with, they work better together. When they like the impact they are having, they find meaning and fulfillment in what they do. Dr. Ross helps them find what they really like while building healthier relationships and pursuing a passion beyond self. A messenger of practical wisdom and needed hope, Dr. Ross untangles the biggest challenges facing today's business leader, tomorrow's workforce, and the future marketplace. He lives with his wife, Luann, and 4 children in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Dr. Randy, to the Voice of Leadership and to Dr. Karen Speaks Leadership.
Well, thank you, Dr. Karen. It is a pleasure to be with you today. And thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be with you as well. I definitely want to hear about this remarkable life, and I know that my community would love to hear about it too. So, first off, I'm going to ask you, Dr. Randy, what is the definition of remarkable, and how did you conceive that concept?
Well, obviously, Dr. Karen, that's a word that's near and dear to my heart. It's the name of our company, for one, and it's also the name of the book, as you alluded to earlier. But remarkable for me means that you live life and you do business in such a way that you blow people away. You go the second mile. You deliver world class service. You provide the unexpected and you mark people's lives for good, even if just for a moment, to such a degree that when they leave your presence, they have this irrepressible desire to talk about you and the good that you brought into their life. Because when people are remarking about you, then you indeed have become remarkable. And I think that's what businesses strive to do. You know, you've heard the term raving fans. I think remarkable is the same thing. Interesting, Robert Stevens, the founder of Geek Squad, several years ago in an Inc. magazine article was quoted as having said this. He said, advertising is a tax you pay for being unremarkable. And I like that because if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. The best form of advertising is word of mouth. And so when you leave an indelible impression, when you mark someone's life for good to such a degree that they can't help but go out and tell other people about it, then you become remarkable.
How wonderful. I would imagine that most businesses would love to be remarkable. So let me ask this. What are some of the barriers that stand in the way of businesses achieving this remarkable state where others remark about them? There must be some barriers that prevent people from getting there. Otherwise, we'd all be there.
Right, right. Well, let me back into that if I may.
Sure.
Let me give you a definition of what we consider to be a remarkable culture. And then we can talk about culture for a little while if you like, but culture happens wherever people get together. So it doesn't matter whether it's in your business or whether it's in the church or synagogue or mosque where you attend worship. It doesn't matter if it's in the philanthropic organization where you volunteer your time or the gym where you go work out. Everywhere people get together, there's a culture. And we define a remarkable culture as a place where people believe the best in each other. They want the best for each other. And so, therefore, they expect the best from each other. I like that three-pronged trilogy because the first talks to trust, the second talks about connection and compassion, and the third talks about accountability. So you're talking about barriers to creating that kind of organizational culture, or think about it this way, that you have a culture in your home. So when there's not trust, what happens to relationships? They fall apart because where trust is low, resistance is high. And it's very difficult to make forward progress or bring about change. The second thing is compassion and connection, which is absolutely essential for team dynamics, for collaboration, wanting the best for each other. And the third one is accountability. So we have to call the best out of each other, which is about healthy coaching within organizations, mentorship, if you will. So the things that are barriers are lack of mentorship, lack of accountability, no connection and compassion, and low levels of trust. Those are all barriers that impede being able to create this remarkable culture where people thrive in a relationally rich environment.
I love those three items. Would you state those one more time?
Absolutely. It's what we call the remarkable cultural trilogy, where people believe the best in one another. They want the best for one another. And so, therefore, they expect the best from one another.
I love that. That is absolutely wonderful. So, when you're talking about corporate culture, which is kind of the ether in which everyone lives in the organization, tell us a little bit about the role of values, beliefs, and behavior as part of that culture.
Well, you just almost gave the exact definition that we use for culture because culture is talked about quite frequently. I think everybody's beginning to understand now that healthy cultures create happiness, they create health, they create productivity, they lead to longevity of tenure, of their team members. And so everybody's beginning to talk a lot about culture, but how we define culture is different. We like to define culture as the collective expression of the values, the beliefs, and the behaviors that individuals bring to the endeavor. So it's not just about their behavior, which is a big part. Some people say, kind of tongue in cheek, that culture is how we play in the sandbox together, or it's how things are really done around here. And so it does speak a lot to behaviors, but underneath every behavior is a belief system. It's the way that you perceive the world. It's the way that you see yourself. It's the way that you see yourself interacting in your world. But beneath that, fundamentally and foundationally behind the belief system is a value construct. And that value construct plays into your personal beliefs, which could be faith. A big part of that is your personal faith. A big part of that is your worldview. A big part of it is both the aspirational, the inspirational part of what you want to become, but also reflective of who you naturally are. That all creates that value construct that we each as individuals hold to be near and dear. And there's a whole philosophy, and this will be fun to talk about. There's a whole philosophy called axiology. And axiology and theology are actually kissing cousins, because axiology posits this belief that in the universe, there's infinite good to infinite bad. And axiology is the study of good. It's trying to define and measure good in the world, but at its very core, it's about creating movements of good. And the way axiology defines good is, they say, axiologically, good is having been designed for a purpose, you fulfill the purpose for which you're designed. Now, in theology, we would call that sanctification, right? But in philosophy, we call that axiology. fulfilling your purpose. And so a lot of what we do is bring principles of axiology into the corporate realm.
Okay, so if a company is struggling, let's say, and they're having challenges and they're having difficulty, and maybe their culture's not quite on point, what are some of the issues that you might diagnose there, so to speak? What's going on with values or beliefs or behavior or that focus on the ultimate good? What may be standing in the way?
Honestly, a lot of times in corporate circles, there's a tremendous amount of toxic behavior. And we see this in a lot of organizations, and it doesn't matter whether it's a nonprofit organization or a large multinational corporation. But sometimes, even in church life, we see this where people are about self promotion and self protection. And it's all about trying to push or promote an agenda as opposed to trying to create a movement of good that's beneficial for everybody concerned. And that's one of the things that I think that a lot of organizations struggle with is to create a relationally rich environment where people can flourish. You know, you said at the top of the podcast, describing our work, it's so true that happy people do good work. They just do. Happy people do their work better. And when you really enjoy doing the work with the people that you do it with, you're more productive because you may be able to go faster alone, but you can go farther together. And so creating a relationally rich environment where people can thrive and they can collaborate and bring creativity and sharpen each other and encourage each other. That's what we really are trying to create within corporate life. And so all of those are elements that can be addressed with applied axiology, the principles that can help an organization move things in a positive direction. We want to eliminate the negative or toxic behavior. And then we want to equip leaders to be strong in being able to create the sort of environment where people are inspired to bring the best of who they are to work every day.
And I know that this is much easier said than done. And I've seen a lot of companies and cultures where the toxic behavior is going on, the self-promotion and the self-protection that you talked about, and where it's difficult for them to even imagine creating, let's say, an agenda together that's a good direction or a good agenda or something that's positive in its focus because there's not the trust that's there very often. And so when you think about ways to intervene when the culture is already toxic, how do you help to move people who are very entrenched where they are?
One of the first things you have to do is you have to create what we call value centricity. Now, don't go look that up because that's a word that we made up. That's one of the prerogatives of being an author. You can make things up. But value centricity means that the values within the organization are aligned. First, an organization has to decide who are they and what do they stand for and what do they want to accomplish. That's what we call our vision, our values, and our mission statement, right? But then people who choose to be a part of that organization, their values have to align with the values of the organization. And when they do, then they can create value centricity, which is an alignment of values, creating a circuit through which energy can flow to light up the world and do good. So the first thing that has to happen is there has to be an alignment of values. My personal values have to match the values of the organization. If not, then it's not going to be too terribly long until I'm going to be experiencing cognitive dissonance. In other words, they're going to be expecting me to do things that I don't morally, ethically feel like I should do, or they're going to be requiring things of me that go against the grain of my personal commitment and value construct. And that's when organizations have a really, really hard time coalescing because the values of the individuals are not shared by the organization and vice versa. But when we're all on the same page, we all have a common vision, we all have a common commitment on how we're going to get there, and we're not going to compromise our values. We know what our values are. And by that, they're not just on a plaque in the lobby, but everybody has embraced them, they've embodied them, and they imbue them. And all three of those are important, that they have to personally own them, they have to manifest them, and they also have to be evangelists for them. When that takes place, then what happens is that culture becomes magnetic. It both attracts the right kind of people and it begins to repel the wrong kind of people. The challenge for most organizations is they don't have values that are strong enough to be repulsive. An organization that has a culture worth its salt, its values should be so strong that it repels people who don't align with those values. The problem with most organizations is they're so intent on filling a seat with the most talented or most competent person. And the thing that they overlook is, does this person share the values that we possess as an organization? Because culture is really nothing less than the character of the organization. And that's very critical, because then you begin to realize that every addition to the team is either going to codify a great culture or they're going to compromise our culture. And you can't afford to have your culture compromised by people coming into the organization who don't share your values.
This is such an important conversation that we're having. I see this every day. What you're talking about is the impact on organizational culture by people who may be the wrong fit. What's fascinating to me is that even though a culture may be strong and you would think it would repel the wrong people, sometimes people are in there and they have their own reasons for not wanting to leave. And I think very often the organization itself, the top leadership, is not as willing to get rid of people they need to get rid of because they are never going to share the values of the corporation. It's always going to be a friction point, and they're always going to basically have somebody working against them in the organization, no matter how talented that person may be. So, speak a little bit about those kinds of issues.
Well, you're right. You do see this quite frequently, unfortunately, in a lot of corporate situations where we reward the wrong behavior. And you will get more of what you reward. And so, to your point, I've worked with a lot of organizations who may have an extremely talented team member, let's say a great salesperson who brings in a tremendous amount of revenue into the life of the organization. But at the very same time, he or she behaves in such a way that it demoralizes other team members, because maybe they're in sales and they're bringing in a lot of volume in terms of closed deals, but the pressure that they're putting on the ops team, the people who have to come behind and deliver the service that's been promised, they may be devastating them with expectations that are unrealistic or poor relational activity. And I see a lot of times where organizations are afraid to step up and intervene in situations like that and go, hey, that doesn't align with our values. That behavior either needs to change or you need to shift out of the organization. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen. And what happens over the long haul is it may serve the organization in the short run, but they compromise what they could have had in the long run. And they exchange a short-term benefit, money through closed deals, for the long-term loss of morale, or other people exiting the organization because they've gotten burned or they've gotten discouraged or they've gotten disillusioned because no one will step up and address the bad behavior. And so I think that it's all this matter of interchange between, are we willing to take a short-term loss for a long-term gain? Or do we want the short-term gain, not realizing what the long-term loss will be? And that's a tension. That's a tension, particularly in publicly traded organizations, because there's this dynamic tension when you have to have quarterly returns, where who do we serve first? Do we serve our shareholders who are looking to get a benefit from their investment, or do we take care of our stakeholders first? Our stakeholders are employees, our supply chain, our vendors. In other words, that whole ecosystem that provides our service or our product. And I've seen time and time and time again decisions made in corporate life where the shareholders are put first to the expense of the stakeholders. And what happens, that may drive a great quarterly return, but in the long run, it's damaging for the organization. And so I think that we have to get back to putting our people first. and making sure that that employee experience is robust and that it's dynamic. And then we create a place where people love to come to work. They wake up in the morning and they don't have the attitude, well, I have to go to work, but they want to go to work. And then that's when really great things begin to happen in organizational life. And in the long run, if the shareholder is patient, it's much, much better for them as well. They may not see the immediate return, but the long-term return can be 10, 20, 30 times what it would have been had they settled for the short term.
Oh, I think this is hugely relevant and very important to talk about. What seems like a short-term cost is really less a cost than it is an investment in the future. And when you think about it that way, and you're investing the resources today and for a larger return on the back end is really what you're referring to. People have to think about it that way, look more holistically, not just in today's moment only. And then in essence, you're kind of selling the company off, if you will, and it could be a whole lot more. So, you mentioned something else that I want you to comment on and to double down on a little bit. You were talking about the employee experience. And we know that there's a connection between the employee experience and also the customer experience and what happens. So talk about that and why it's really important for companies to double down on that.
There's no question that the customer experience is going to be a direct reflection of the employee experience. So the question is, if we want to have a stellar customer experience, how do we make the employee experience better? And it all gets back to this idea of putting your people before profit. And a lot of organizations are still struggling with that idea. They want to do what's going to drive results. They want to do what's going to drive more money to the bottom line. But they don't think about the fact that without your people, nothing is going to happen. And so if we don't take care of our people in the right kind of a way, then sooner or later the business is going to suffer. Now, that can take on a myriad of different forms. We have one organization that we have done work with, one that you may be familiar with. It's a little chicken sandwich shop in our backyard here in Atlanta, Georgia. It's called Chick-fil-A. And they have done arguably a phenomenal job when it comes to creating a culture about taking care of people, because they definitely put making a difference above making a dollar. And here's the point. It started with the founder, Truett Cathy, way back in 1946. But in 2022, this is interesting information for those who want to see the business case for it. In 2022, Chick-fil-A was just about ready to break through the $19 billion mark. Okay? $18.8 billion in gross revenue. That was more revenue than their top 5 competitors combined. More than Popeyes, Cane's, Chicken, Zaxby's, and Wingstop combined. And here's what's fascinating, Dr. Karen. They generated more gross revenue than their top 5 competitors with almost a third the number of retail outlets. So their 5 competitors had 10,600 outlets, while Chick-fil-A had just under 3,000. Now think about that. Now Chick-fil-A does several things to take care of their people, if you know much about them. Number one, they give them a day off. They give them Sunday off.
That's right. They are not even open on Sundays. So they're working one less day.
And arguably in the quick service restaurant space, that's one of the busiest days of the week for most organizations. But they said, no, our values dictate that we're going to be closed one day a week. Part of that was a commitment to faith. Part of that's a commitment to their people. But they said, we're going to be closed. I can't even begin to tell you how many people-centric programs Chick-fil-A has. This kind of says it all. Their motto, their mission statement currently is very simple. And it's this: to be the world's most caring company. Now, what does that have to do with chicken sales? Absolutely nothing. But it's about taking care of people. And you see this in their Red Couch commercials, right? Because the Red Couch commercials are about acts of kindness. How do we take care of our people, not just internally, but externally as well? And that's the whole focus. The point is that when organizations deeply invest in taking care of their people, Their people appreciate that. Their people feel affirmed, acknowledged, respected. They in turn bring the best of who they are to the equation. And then they provide the same kind of stellar service to the customer base that they themselves have received as the employee. And it makes perfect sense. But why so many organizations fail to recognize that simple idea that just simply taking care of your people is the best thing that you can do to drive business? It seems like common sense, but unfortunately, it's not common practice.
Well, I think one of the things that you were talking about, I think they sometimes think that there is no connection between creating the most caring company, let's say, in the world on the planet, and the results of the business, when in fact, your results do depend on that. You get the best results by caring for your people. And I think that a lot of businesses really don't believe that. They don't know that. And they haven't seen it because they haven't tried it, you know. But just to think, here's a business that doesn't even work on Sundays, the busiest day in the fast food industry, and yet they're outpacing their nearest five competitors. That says something about the value of caring for people. And so I think we have to talk about it differently. We have to connect those two. Yeah, it does make a difference. They're deeply connected.
Well, I think that a lot of organizations, they strive to be the best. Here's a great question. A friend of mine by the name of Jeff Henderson has an organization called the Four Company. He wrote a book entitled Four. And he makes this challenge. He says there are a lot of organizations that try to be the best in the world, but we need to be the best for the world. And there's a big difference between the two. The way that we like to say it in our organization is there are two kinds of organizations. There are the organizations that use people to grow the business. And there are a lot of organizations that do that. But the best organizations in the world use the business to grow the people who then grow the business. When your focus is on using the business to grow the people, helping the people aspire, helping the people attain their goals, their dreams, their hopes, their aspirations, equipping them to become leaders worth following, providing for them the resources they need to excel, not just at work, but at home as well. When you have that kind of focus on helping people grow, then the dividends are hard to describe because they're exponential. And people, because you've marked their life for good, they then want to turn around and mark other people's lives for good. And that's the whole idea of creating a movement of good, which brings us back to the principles of axiology.
I love it. And I really think that that work, if you will, that the employees then do is done with much greater ease. It's not really work. It comes naturally. It springs out of what's been invested in them. And therefore, they just naturally show that out to the customers and also their fellow employees, the other people who they're working with inside the organization as well. So, Dr. Randy, I know there's a concept that's related to this that you talk about, which is this whole notion of value creation. And you have four maxims of value creation: creativity, positivity, sustainability, responsibility. Tell us how this ties in to what we've been talking about so far.
Well, those four maxims are at the very heart of axiology. So, those are the principles that we help organizations not only begin to understand, but be able to put into practice to create and crystallize a very compelling culture. So, the first one that you mentioned, the maxim of creativity, just simply says this: we are all designed to create value in life, which means that we feel good when we do good. That's the way that God made us. He created us to give back to the world, not just to be consumers, but to be creators, creators of good. And so that's where it all begins. And then the question tied to that is, do you create on a daily basis more value than you take? In other words, do you bring more to the table for others than you expect others to give you in return? See, there are two types of people in the world. There are value creators and there are value extractors. A value creator lives by what I call an abundance mentality, And they say, look, if we all bring more to the table than we take away, then at the end of the day, there will be a surplus on the table that can be shared by everybody who helped to create that value. And that's a win for everybody. On the other hand, there are value extractors, and we all have had experience with value extractors. They're people who are very myopic. It's all about them, what's in it for me, who live by a scarcity mentality, and they believe there's not enough to go around in the world. So therefore, I have to get to the table to get as much for myself as I possibly can. And often that's with blatant disregard for anybody else. But the challenge is if everybody has the attitude of being a value extractor, it won't be too long until there's nothing left on the table. When there's nothing left on the table, go home, right? And so this whole idea of do you bring more to the table than you take away? That's the principle of creativity, the maxim of creativity. And I'll just tell you this, that the more value you create, the more invaluable you become. And I don't care if that's in organizational life. I don't care if that's in personal life. I honestly, Dr. Karen, the same thing applies to my wife and to our relationship in the home. My wife has what I call an emotional piggy bank. And here's the thing. If I make more deposits into her emotional piggy bank than I make withdrawals, if I'm more interested in her good than my own good, if I'm bringing more to her than I'm expecting from her, if I'm striving to make her world better where she can thrive, then her emotional piggy bank is full and life is good. But if I'm making more demands on her than I'm giving to her, if I expect more from her than I'm creating for her, I'm going to drain that reservoir pretty quickly. And when I do, mama ain't happy. And if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, right?
There's nothing else to draw out of the bank either.
She's depleted, and our relationship is bankrupt. And so the same thing happens personally, and it can happen professionally as well, because we have to consciously keep our hand on the helm of culture. And we do that by value creation, because you're going to have a culture. Anywhere people get together, you're going to have a culture. The question will be by design, meaning you give it a thoughtful reflection, intentionality, and moving it in a constructive way, or are you going to have it by default? You're not thinking about it. And just one day you wake up and you don't like it. You often hear couples talking about, I don't know, we just drifted apart. That's a culture by default because you didn't focus on making it better. So the first and most important is the maximum of creativity. And then the second one is positivity. Positivity just says, do you leave a positive wake in the world? It's a great question. Do you leave a positive? Because all of us sometimes move through life in such a way that we don't slow down long enough to smell our own exhaust. But we leave a ripple impact on the shore, and we need to know what that is. So we need to stop and think about, are we leaving a positive wake in all that we do? The third is sustainability, which simply says to continuously create value, leverage your passion and your strengths to solve problems. And I love this one because there's a lot of talk in our world about passion. There's a lot of talk in our world about strengths. But the key is we have to leverage both of those to solve problems. And the bigger problem you solve, the more value you create, the more value you create, the more invaluable you become. And the last one is the principle or the maximum of responsibility, which just simply says to have the biggest impact, determine what are those elements over which you do have control, because there are a lot of elements over which you don't have control, and apply your energy to move those forward in a positive direction. Take responsibility for those things that you can change and move in a positive way. And there's so many more nuances to that and how we apply that across the board in organizational life, but that's the essence. And that's what we unpack in the book Remarkable.
Well, that sounds absolutely phenomenal and wonderful information for people to absorb and apply. And so let me ask you, what is the connection between what we're talking about now, this value creation process, and people living for the purpose for which they're created, and also the impact that they're having in the company? So there's some kind of connection between all of those. How do you see those going together?
Well, they're intricately intertwined because Passion comes as a result of pursuing your purpose in life. And purpose in life is exactly what we're talking about. Everyone's purpose in life is the same or should be the same. And that's to bring value to other people. Scripture is real clear. God so loved the world that he gave. God was a giver. We, in order to be a part of his greater purpose, are givers as well as we reflect his likeness to the world. And so as we create good for others, that's what brings meaning and fulfillment and joy to life. From a psychological standpoint, when people are depressed, when they're anxious, it's all because their focus is on themselves. It's because they've turned internally and they're concerned about what's going to happen with me, what's going to happen to me, why is this happening against me? And their focus is on trying to get through that particular circumstance, but it's all myopically driven. We know psychologically the antidote to depression and anxiety is to turn your focus outward, and either through appreciation for others or in helping others, but put your focus on helping other people, and it will begin to eliminate the anxiety, the stress, the depression as you focus on doing good for others. So it's profound. And then when you talk about organizationally, the power when an organization is on mission together, they don't just have a mission, they're on a mission together, then that's where the real cohesiveness, the team dynamics begin to gel. And you can begin to move things forward at lightning speed sometimes because you've got this value centricity that we're talking about.
So let me ask you a more personal question. How did you come to do this work that you're doing in the marketplace? How are you fulfilling your purpose and your unique design in living like this?
Well, I appreciate you asking the question. For me, this is so much fun because I look at the research that's available, especially from organizations like Gallup on employee engagement. And you would know that less than a third of the American workforce is what Gallup describes as actively engaged, meaning that they bring passion, enthusiasm, excitement to the work experience. But think about that for just a minute. Only a third of the American workforce. Now, pragmatically, that translates into $1.9 trillion of lost opportunity cost. That's just the economic impact. But let's talk about the emotional impact. People don't like what they do. And for a long time, I've sat back and I've said, that has to change. The most time that any of us spend is in our work. And if we don't enjoy our work, then what's life about? And so for me, the passion is to be able to go in and help individuals and organizations begin to understand life is too short not to enjoy what you're doing. Now, where this came from, the genesis of all of it was that I spent the first almost 2 decades of my career in the not-for-profit space. I worked with some phenomenal organizations that did great good in the community and had a high impact on making life better for a lot of people. But I learned through that, Dr. Karen, how do you motivate volunteers? Because in a nonprofit, it's driven by voluntary time, energy, and resources. So the only way that you can create a movement among volunteers is to tap into their passion, to have a cause or a purpose or a mission that they believe in, and then honor and recognize them and fuel their energy by appreciation and this rally cry to do something that's worthwhile. Now, take that. I took those lessons learned in the space of philanthropy and move those over into the for-profit space. And guess what? It's exactly the same because people are not primarily, they're not primarily driven by financial gain. They're not. I mean, if they're paid a fair wage in a fair market for fair work, that's great. But what really drives people, what people want to be a part of it is a mission that's larger than themselves. And they want to do it with people they enjoy doing it with. And beyond that, they want to have fun doing what they're doing because they feel like they're making a difference in the world. And so by taking those ideas and those concepts and those principles from the not-for-profit world and translated them over into the for-profit space, the results are amazing. Because if you think about it from a standpoint of a leader, the greatest resource that you have is the untapped latent energy that lies within the margins of life, the discretionary effort that your people have that you've not yet tapped into. So if you could just get that 30 or 33% that are actively engaged, if you could get that number up to 40 or 45 or 50%, the impact on the organization would be extraordinary. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about creating a culture that's inspirational to tap into that discretionary effort in the margins of life.
And it is true that in the nonprofit sector, they're very tuned into what they believe in terms of the mission that they're going after, why they exist, who it is that they intend to impact on the back end of what they're set up to do. And so it's great to bring that same kind of spirit to the for-profit world as well. I find that there's a lot of cross-pollination that can happen in both directions for different purposes, for
Right.
both what the nonprofits can learn from the for-profit and vice versa. So let me ask this. We haven't used these words exactly, although I know when people are fulfilled at work, there's this happiness component that's a part of it. And there's hope that I know is a very important concept for you. How are those two connected, hope and happiness?
Well, I wrote a book during COVID entitled Fireproof Happiness. And a friend of mine challenged me to write it because we looked at what was taking place in the world around us with COVID and all the challenges and the anxiety. And he said, you really need to write a book on hope that will give people an optimistic view. And I said, well, that's interesting. And so I took up the challenge. But my audience predominantly, while I do enjoy speaking for not-for-profit and particularly in the church realm, the vast majority of the work I do is in corporate America, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. And I can't always lead with chapter and verse. And so I wanted to write a book on hope that was not heavily faith-based, because I knew that would be something my audience in the corporate world may not immediately embrace. And so I wanted to take it from a scientific standpoint. And I did a great amount of research. I gathered over 250 scientifically validated, peer-reviewed research papers on the power, the efficacy of hope. And then I kind of synthesized it and crystallized it and put it in a form that everyone can pick up and read and easily understand and apply. And the link between hope and happiness is irrefutable. Everybody in the world is searching for happiness, but very few people attain it or know how to attain it. And the secret element is hope. But here's what you have to first of all understand what hope is. You have to define it properly. Then you have to know how to pursue it. And it's not what most people think. And that's what I write about in Fireproof Happiness, because happiness is driven when let's define hope. Hope is a dynamic motivational system that's tied to inspirational goal setting. Happiness does not come in attaining the goal that you desire. Happiness comes in the challenge of the pursuit. That is something that really is interesting, because John Templeton, a wise man, once said, he said, happiness pursued eludes, but happiness given returns. So what he was saying is that everything good in life that you want, you can't get by setting it as a goal and trying to attain it. It comes by creating value for other people. In other words, I'm the happiest as a husband when my wife is happy. I'm the happiest as a father, as a parent, when my kids are happy. I'm the happiest as a team leader when my teams are happy. So therefore, happiness comes by providing those things that create an atmosphere of happiness for others, which comes full circle back to what we were talking about before. Maybe you've heard the statement before, hope is not a strategy. Everybody's heard that in corporate circles, but I would suggest that hope is absolutely the best strategy if you understand what hope is. Because if you're pursuing any endeavor, and the people who are involved in that endeavor are hopeless about it, it's never going to become a reality. So hope is actually your best strategy. And hope is the basis for happiness, but it's also the basis for health, for productivity, and for longevity. We go into great detail, kind of pulling that apart, unpacking it, and talking about it as we deconstruct hope and then put hope back together again.
Well, and I know that you and I both have a deep love and respect for Viktor Frankl, who certainly is one of the luminaries out there on this whole notion of hope. Maybe say a word or two about that.
Well, Viktor Frankl, as you well know, is the author of a book that is a classic called Man's Search for Meaning. And he was an Austrian neuroscientist, a psychiatrist, and a philosopher who was Jewish, taken prisoner in a Nazi prisoner of war camp. And all of his worldly possessions were taken away. All of his family members were exterminated, executed in the gas chambers, the Nazi gas chambers. And it was a horrific, horrific period of time for him as he endured 4 different concentration camps. But he came out on the other side of that and he wrote this book called Man's Search for Meaning. And it talks about the eternal struggle, about the common thread in humanity, which is suffering. That all of us have disappointment, disillusionment, dreams that are dashed, loved ones that are lost, challenges in life that are difficult to face. That's the common bond that ties us all together in humanity. But he talks about the importance of both being able to have the hope to persevere in the end while combining it with the discipline to embrace the difficult truth of the reality of your situation. But he writes this masterful piece and essentially says everything in life can be stripped away from you except for one thing. And that one thing is your choice, the power to choose, the power to choose your attitude, the power to choose how you will respond to life circumstances, the power to choose how you will respond even to those who perpetrate the greatest atrocities that mankind has ever seen against you. It's a great story. It's a great book. It's a great lesson of life that when we're down, we're depressed, and we wonder, why is this happening? It's good to learn the lessons from other people who've walked roads that are even more challenging than our own.
Yes, and I really believe that his philosophy is exactly how I would say that my African descent ancestors got through slavery. And they had to think every day about the choices that they could make, which would seem from the outside to be very few. And yet, every minute you are making a choice. You could do this or you could do that. And those choices have different consequences. But just to know that even in a small way, you have some agency makes a difference in terms of the outcomes because you can make the choice for hope and to seeing optimism on the other side of the fence. And which brings me to the next thing I want to say and ask you about, because we've been talking about hope, and there are other words like optimism, there are other words like positivity. We mentioned that. And I know that you see these, each one is a little bit different. So maybe unpack that for us a little bit too.
Well, I love the idea of positivity. There's a great amount of research coming out of the School of Positive Psychology, Dr. Martin Seligman and others. Valuable, valuable work. And I am a big believer in positivity, but positivity serves as the foundation of hope. Positivity alone will not get you through the most challenging issues of life, but it forms the foundation upon which you can then build the skyscraper of hope. Because after positivity, the next, what we call buoyancy belief, is responsibility. And then there's agility. And then there's reality. And all of those are the buoyancy beliefs of hope. So hope begins with positivity, but hope brings more to the equation than just mere positivity.
That's really awesome because, in other words, you're saying you really need all of those building blocks, not just one of them. And if you apply that, let's say, to what Viktor Frankl was doing, how did those other pieces look in his world? How did you see him having something that was beyond just positivity?
Well, the first point, the buoyancy belief of positivity, just it says that I believe that tomorrow can be brighter than today, no matter how dark today may be.
Mhm.
The second buoyancy belief we talked about is responsibility, which says, I'm not a victim of circumstance. I have a say in how my life unfolds. There may be 1,000 things over which I don't have control. I don't have control over the weather. I don't have control over the economy. I don't have control over what might happen to me. I don't even have control over other people, but I do have control over my own internal response. I do have control over my attitude. And so that's where responsibility comes in. The third, and I love this, you talked about agency. The third principle is agility. And agility says there's not one single way for me to get to any desired destination. If one way is blocked, I can work to remove the blockage, or I can choose an alternate route. And if necessary, I can even choose a different destination. But I have the freedom to demonstrate agility, and I can morph and I can change and I can be creative to face whatever life throws my way. And then lastly, your reality. You have to embrace your reality, which just simply says that I need to combine my perseverance and the belief that I will be able to persevere and come through victorious on the other side with the discipline of accepting reality, no matter how harsh it may be. And when you have positivity, responsibility, agility, and reality all together, that forms the foundation for what we call the core of buoyancy beliefs that will keep your head above water when the storm surge rises.
Thank you for really breaking it down with that example because it just makes it more tangible and more visible in a lot of ways. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. I know that you've got your latest book, which is Make Life Good. Tell us a little bit more about what that book is about and what is its connection to legacy.
Um, the book won't be out until August of 24, but I'm looking forward to it because probably Make Life Good is the one I have enjoyed writing the most. All of my books I have thoroughly enjoyed and hope that they're beneficial to the audience that receives them. But the full title of this book is You've Made a Good Living. Now Make Life Good. So Make Life Good is about how do you, beyond just making money and taking care of your own, how do you really turn around and give back to the world? That happiness does not come from titles and trinkets that we attain from the world, but it's in what we bring to the world. It's about what we do for others that they're incapable of doing for themselves. It's about altering our lifestyle so that we can alter the lives of others. It's about doing for one what you wish you could do for everyone, and thereby changing the whole world for that someone, and maybe in the process, changing your whole world too. It's about generosity, it's about legacy, it's about philanthropy. I wrote the book twofold to encourage corporate responsibility. But then also, I wrote it so that it would be a tool that nonprofit groups could use to inspire their donor base to do more than just give their money, more than just their treasures, but give their time and their talent as well. And it's really a fun narrative. It's a parable of sorts that talks about this man in midlife who sees that a lot of what he's pursued in life, the futility of it all. And he's beginning to ask the question, there has to be more to life than just dying in a lake house. You know, there has to be more to life than just taking care of my own. And he's challenged with a simple question. The question comes to him by a very unexpected character. It's a homeless person on the street who comes up to him and says, "Hey, buddy, why do you do what you do?" And he goes, you mean, what do I do? And he goes, no, what you do is not as important as why you do it. Why do you do what you do? Which brings us all the way back around to purpose that we've talked about in our conversation today. Because finding your purpose in life is really what fuels happiness. It's what creates movements of good. It's what brings value to the workforce. It's what ties people together with common values and a purposeful mission. It's at the heart of everything we teach and do.
This is wonderful. And so you have brought it full circle in terms of the new book that's coming out, and it gives people a bit of something to think about when we have a lot of baby boomers who are retiring right now, and we have a lot of other people who are mid-career and thinking about what's the legacy they really want to leave, and are the financial results enough? Usually, there's something else they want to make a mark in on this earth, and this gives them an opportunity to think about what that is. So let me ask you, how can people get a hold of you? How can they reach you? How can they get your books? How can they book you for keynote speeches or anything else they want to connect with you about?
Well, appreciate you asking that. Our books are available wherever fine books are sold. You can get them on Amazon. You can get them on Books A Million. You can get them on Barnes and Noble. They're all available there. As far as reaching me personally, our website is drrandyross.com. That's just DR, no period, randyross.com. If you want to reach me personally, it's very simple, RR for Randy Ross at drrandyross.com. And would love to assist or complement any leadership development initiatives that organizations may have, or help them apply these principles to move their culture in a more positive, affirmative direction.
Fantastic. So that they can really have results all the way around, not just on one end. So what additional words of wisdom do you want to leave for my community of corporate executive business leaders?
Uh, in the front of Fireproof Happiness, there's a trilogy statement that maybe would be a great thing to leave your listening audience with today. And it goes like this: joy is the emotional response of hope. Peace is the emotional response of faith. And love is the expression of them both. So loving people, taking care of people, putting people first in organizational life is what we started off talking about when we were talking about culture, right? And now we've concluded in talking about hope. And I think the power of hope is that it's the foundational, fundamental building block for happiness, health, productivity, and longevity. If we can build resilient teams that understand the power of hope, then business and life will be much better.
Amen to that. I can see it already. You know what, Dr. Randy, what you just said about business and life, every principle that you've talked about is relevant beyond business as well. And so if we just live like this, we will have better lives. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with the audience today.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Dr. Karen. It's great hanging out with you and having this conversation. And I just want to thank you again for your time today.
You are welcome. And so today we are going to close the show with a verse, Proverbs, the 16th chapter and verse 16. And it says, how much better to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding is to be chosen rather than silver. So today we have learned from Dr. Randy that those building blocks of wisdom and understanding, as he's unpacked them in the package of hope, that if we have that, that's what generates the gold that lasts in all different directions in our lives. If you just get the gold without the wisdom and without the understanding, you'll probably lose on all fronts. So win today. Go for wisdom, go for understanding, spread hope, add value to others in your life and in your workplace. And we'll see you next time. Hello, it's Dr. Karen here, and I'm here to celebrate the work of the Bible League, which is a global ministry that provides Bibles, ministry study materials, and through activities like Project Philip, also teaches and trains local people in how to share the Word of God. So today, the president and CEO of the Bible League, Yost Snoop, is with me to share a little bit more about what the Bible League is doing.
Yeah, the beauty of the local church is that it is the body of Christ, and it is the Holy Spirit that is calling the local church to be engaged in the Great Commission. As Bible League, we just come alongside those local pastors. Last year, I met a pastor, his name is Rolando, in the Amazon, and he has this great vision to reach 200 communities with the Word of God. And we're able to come alongside them and help them with Bibles and resources.
Thank you so much, Yos. We are all partners together. You, the Bible League, are the hands and feet to the local people on the ground, and there are partners and donors out there who can be hands and feet to you as you also share with others. So those of you who are listening, if you want to be part of this ministry, and I invite you to be a part of it, I'm a part of it, go to BibleLeague.org, see more about the ministry, and see how you can participate and donate. You've been listening to The Voice of Leadership with me, Dr. Karen Wilson Starks. And I want to give a special thanks to jazz saxophonist Ron McMillan for granting us permission to use his gifted music on our show. Thanks for listening, and remember to go to my website, transleadership.com, for more strategies, insights, and leadership resources.